Call to order the meeting of the Education Committee. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Buck. Here. Senator Doñate. Senator Flores. Present. Senator Hammond. Present. Senator Neal. Here. Senator Titus. Chair Lang.
And please mark Senator Donate absent excused when he arrives. Okay, thank you everyone for coming here today. We have a full agenda. And again, we'll take care of the housekeeping items. Please silence your electronic devices. I always have to be reminded, so I'll remind you every committee hearing. If you wish to testify, please sign up at the table by the door and provide a business card to our committee secretary. When testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state your name and affiliation, if any, for the record, and turn the microphone off each time you finish talking. Presenters have provided 10 copies for members of the public and submitted their presentations electronically to the committee manager, Louise Bush, by 1 p.m. yesterday. Anyone who wishes to view these materials can find them on NALA's. We'll take public comment at the end of the meeting, and please note that I reserve the right to limit the length of public comment. You may submit your full comments in writing and then briefly summarize them in your spoken testimony. Committee members will be using laptops. Please don't take that as disrespect or inattention. They have the documents on their laptops, and so they'll need to be looking at them so that they can be prepared for the meeting. And with that, I'm going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 71.
Good afternoon, Chair Lang. I am Senator Dina Neal representing Senate District 4, and I'm here today to present SB 71, which creates the Nevada State Education Support Professional Recruitment and Retention Advisory Task Force. Just a little bit of background information. Teachers and other educational personnel are critical components of the education system, and for several years, Nevada policymakers have focused on ways to assist schools in the recruitment and retention of teachers, such as creating the Nevada State Teacher Recruitment and Retention Advisory Task Force, which was established by AB 276 in 2019. However, the critical need to address additional school support staff has continued to be an issue in the state of Nevada, and that is what SB 71 is attempting to tackle. So I will move into kind of just discuss the highlights of SB 71. So basically, this bill is an amendment to AB 276. So the last bill focused on teachers. This one now focuses on support professionals and what they need in terms of a task force. If you look at Section 3, basically it sets forth the definitions, defines who would be included in this bill. If you go to Section 5, I read this as a codification of existing membership because it's similar to the prior legislation, which basically allows representation by county if you're less than 700,000, if you're over 700,000. Also establishes the term, the time, the manner of meetings, compensation, and who would also be the members. If you go to Section 5, Sub 7, it mandates, to me, even more so manner, on who is involved with the task force and how they're treated by the local government. So basically, it talks about their leave and how a state agency or local government shall not require an officer or employee who is a member of the task force to make up their time if they're absent from work, or force them to take annual leave, vacation, or compensatory time for their absence. Section 6 sets forth the experience, total qualifications of the task force. It also creates the process for applying in subsection 3. And then finally, in section 7, it evaluates the challenges of attracting and retaining support professionals by making recommendations on what should occur to keep support professionals in the state. And after that, it's just the effective date of July 1st, 2023. So that, in essence, is the bill. I supplied in the exhibits backup information so you could see what the Teacher Recruitment Advisory Task Force had updated for February 1st, 2023. And I also put in what happened in 2020, just to try to give you a framework of what is the work prior that we're now adding paraprofessionals to. And with that, I will open myself up for questions. Oh, I do want to make this caveat. I did not serve on the Interim Education Committee. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Neal. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Neal. I certainly understand what you're trying to achieve here, because we do have definite issues for lack of professionals in our education system. My question is, and I've made this comment before, I'm going to continue to make it, is yet another commission. And I pointed out the other day we have about 215 boards and commissions already. We have a lack of everybody that you listed to be on this commission, but yet now they're going to be on another commission. In my mind, how does this, is there anything that prohibits the either the interim legislative commission or committee to already do this, and or I see it as a job that our school superintendent, we have a Department of Education, we have a superintendent for that. Is there something that is prohibiting either the interim committee on education to do this, or, in my mind, our school superintendent?
Chair Lang, Senator Neal, to Senator Titus.
Please go direct.
Okay. I don't think so. I also believe that this work could probably be rolled into the existing task force, just adding on the extra layer of talking about support professionals along with teachers. I think that superintendents should be already engaging in the work on how to figure out how to support paraprofessionals. They have school counselors, they have psychologists, they have drivers of school buses, secretaries, maintenance workers, all of those people who have an active union, who probably engage and bring up issues, probably a lot, about issues that the superintendent should address, or at least the school board trustees.
Follow up, Madam Chair? And just to acknowledge what you're trying to do, my daughter's a school psychologist in Lyon County, and she continues to complain about that the paraprofessionals, the professionals, are frequently ignored when it is in the discussion of teachers. And so thank you for at least addressing that this is a group of folks that are so needed that we pass laws. They have to have social workers in their school. They have to have psychologists, and they're being left out. But in my mind, we have folks that should be already doing this. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think Senator Titus alluded with her last point to my question, because we often in this committee, in fact, at the very last meeting, we were talking about superintendents and reference, well, superintendents are meeting already, why are we doing this? But I think if you could just touch on that point, when they are in the room, what that conversation is like, are folk paying attention to them? Because I think that would help differentiate some of the conversations that often happen in this room, which is folk are already doing this, but if it's already happening, are folk being heard? And then second, looking at page 4 of the bill, I see that you want to make sure that they're not currently already serving in any board or commission or council. And I think if you address that issue and explain why we want to make sure that they're not already sitting somewhere else, the intent of that.
Thank you for that, Senator Flores. So I do think, listen, I'm not a fan of over government, over regulating people. I do want accountability, and I do want folks to be heard. I think that support professionals, because if you look at the lineage of legislation that we brought forward, bringing in school psychologists, social workers, and other entities, I think we put them into the schools, but not necessarily giving them a platform or a voice on what is happening to them. I think that I think that they're not always heard. Are they heard sometimes? Potentially, but they're heard at the school level. And I think the intent, or what I understand to be the intent behind this legislation, is because education is a national issue. It's a huge issue in our state, trying to make sure that all personnel within the school system and their needs are being addressed at a state level and coming down. And what we've heard in prior hearings, or even just historically in this building, if the legislature doesn't say it, then no one takes heed to it. Do I think paraprofessionals are seeking that kind of support through this bill? Yes. Do I believe that paraprofessionals could be rolled into the existing task force of under 2019? Yes, I do. However, the interim committee saw it in their wisdom to bring this bill forward, and I'm presenting it. And so it is up to this committee to decide in their own wisdom whether or not they feel this is a duplication, whether or not this should be rolled into an existing statutory provision, and then mandate that the existing task force on teachers take up paraprofessionals rather than having two. But I will leave that wisdom to this committee. And with that, I will move into your next question on the page 4, which is, I believe it's subsection C, lines 3 through 5. This language mimics the 2019 language, that they didn't want existing members that were serving somewhere else to be on the committee. They wanted new folks to be on the committee, in my understanding, offer a different perspective or new voice, because sometimes, as you've seen in our committees, we have an overlap. And when we have an overlap of individuals that served on this committee, that committee, and the other, sometimes you don't get a new perspective. Sometimes you get a perspective that is regenerated that you don't necessarily need to hear, because you're spreading your content or what you understand across 3 committees versus actually having, I could imagine that if you actually had a bus driver on a committee talking about their experience, it would change the dynamic of what we think about what they experience, because I don't think we've ever had that conversation with them. I don't think I've ever actually seen in a school board meeting bus drivers come to the table and talk about transportation. I know during COVID, we had maintenance heavily come out and talk about how they were, the mandates around cleaning, the mandates around, what the bathroom should look like, the filters, and making sure that everything in the building was going to be sanitary. And I distinctly remember in my district being told that the ESSER dollars or the federal dollars were being spent, and they purchased mops, that they were like, I don't want a mop, right? I want something else that will help me to clean this building and not reshuffle the dirt around the building during COVID, because we didn't know what was going on. And that voice was not necessarily filtering up, but it was filtering to me. And so I will fall back on the prior statement. It is in the wisdom of the Senate Education Committee to decide what is appropriate legislation to move out of this committee, and whether or not this is redundant, and what we need to do for our paraprofessionals.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, if I may, if you've ever questioned whether or not Senator Neal has a heart, it is right here on her desk. We all know you have one, Senator Neal. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, we'll do public comment. Those speaking in favor of the bill, please approach the dais, say your name and who you're affiliated with, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Daly. Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. First, let me thank Senator Neal and the interim committee for this bill. NSCA supports SB 71, creating the Nevada State Education Support Professional Recruitment and Retention Advisory Task Force. While there rightfully has been a great deal of focus on teacher vacancies, Nevada schools also face a record shortage of education support professionals, a critical component of the family of educators in our schools. Students have a range of needs that must be met for learning to take place. Transportation professionals make sure our kids arrive safely in the morning. Nutrition professionals make sure no child is trying to learn on an empty stomach. Custodial and maintenance keep the learning environment clean and safe. Tech professionals do the necessary task of keeping our students online. Paraprofessionals tirelessly support students in their learning. Clerical support staff do about 30 different jobs, including making sure our schools run smoothly. Over the past couple of years, Nevada school districts have tried to weather an unprecedented shortage of education support professionals, including bus drivers, food service workers, and paraprofessionals. Due to this crisis, many districts greatly reduce services like student transportation. Shortages of paraprofessionals compound problems related to teacher vacancies, compromising learning in the classroom. The crisis is continuing. Today, the Clark County School District lists nearly 500 vacant support professional positions, with another 200 in Washoe. NSCA raised this issue at the Interim Education Committee last summer. We proposed the model of the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force to address this issue, as that task force has proven very successful in terms of their recommendations. We appreciate the inclusion of other licensed education professionals like counselors, psychologists, and social workers. We did support SB 151 last session to address the overwhelming caseloads of these specialized instructional support personnel. As if this task force moves forward, or as it moves forward, we believe it will be important to make sure that the specific needs and voices of both classified and other licensed education professionals are included in this work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dr. Mary Przinski, and I'm here representing Nevada Association of School Superintendents. And I think everything has been outlined about how important paraprofessionals are in our schools. And I realize the concern about several task force, but until you have a group that's actually focused on that particular issue and you have representatives from the different paraprofessional groups, I think it's important to hear from them, get their look or their outlook on things, and you only get that when you have a commission that's focusing just on those particular issues. So it's a matter of time and focus, and so we support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there anyone else in Carson City wishing to speak in favor of the bill? Is there anyone in Las Vegas seeking to speak in favor of the bill? BPS, is there anyone on the phones?
Thank you, Chair. One moment. To testify in support of Senate Bill 71, please press *9 on your phone to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers on the line wishing to provide testimony in support at this time.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience in Carson City wishing to speak against? Anyone in Las Vegas wishing to speak against? Anyone on the phones, please?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in opposition on Senate Bill 71, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. Is there anyone in Carson City wishing to speak in neutral? In Las Vegas wishing to speak neutral? And on the phone wishing to speak neutral?
You, Chair, to testify in neutral on Senate Bill 71, please press *9 on your phone to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 71. And I see we have a whole bunch of students coming in. I just wondered if we might invite them in for a second just to, while we're waiting for Senator Dondero Loop. Do you want to invite him? Okay, I see Senator Dondero Loop is here. So I'm going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 72, and please begin when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It feels very odd to have to be invited into education, but I'm happy to be here. I miss you as well. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Senator Marilyn Dondero Loop, representing Senate District 8 in Clark County. I am here today to present Senate Bill 72, which directs the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Education to conduct 5 studies during the 23-24 interim. The bill before you today is a recommendation from the Interim Committee on Education, of which Senator Buck and I both served. As you all know, education is continually changing landscape. It requires policymakers to review existing practices and proactively identify and implement programs that will strengthen Nevada's education system. While our committee met 11 times, there were several areas identified by members that needed additional examination. As I go through each of the studies outlined in the bill, I will address the origin of each recommendation. Senate Bill 72 requires the next Interim Committee on Education to study 5 issues. The first issue is mental health and wellness of students. After hearing several presentations on student mental health and well-being, including from the president of the Nevada Association of School Psychologists, discussion centered on the need for evidence-based mental health and wellness programming, and the need for the collection of such evidence in Nevada to better understand the mental health crisis in our schools and the mental health impacts on different communities. The second issue the next interim committee would study concerns teacher workload, including reviewing relevant requirements in statutes and regulations. This was a recommendation presented to the committee by the Nevada State Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force. Nevada teachers are faced with a heavy burden of statutory, regulatory, and policy requirements, some of which may be redundant. The task force indicated that the extensive nature of these requirements sometimes impacts employee satisfaction, resulting in fatigue and excessive workloads. The next study was also recommended by the teacher task force and concerns teacher licensing requirements, including a review on the impacts of those requirements on teacher diversity, effectiveness, and recruitment. The task force indicated that certain licensure requirements, such as the Praxis Core Academic Skills for Educator test, act as a potential barrier for prospective teachers, including increasing a diverse educator workforce. Additionally, the task force stressed the need to ensure competency requirements are reasonable indicators for educator effectiveness. The study would look at existing and prospective requirements in this manner. The fourth topic is high school student achievement and graduation trends. The committee agreed a study is necessary to determine the factors causing the disparity between increasing graduation rates and decreasing proficiency rates in Nevada. The final study outlined in this bill concerns policies and strategies to address the needs of and provide interventions for students requiring additional resources. Some discussion during the interim centered on the needs of Nevada's Latino students, specifically a lack of representation at four-year institutions, lagging graduation rates among Latino students, and possible interventions, including a statewide study, was reviewed and discussed. For each of these 5 studies, the interim committee is required to submit a report on its findings and any recommendations for legislation to the legislature before the next legislative session. In conclusion, each of these studies was identified unanimously by the 21-22 interim committee as necessary topics to review. I urge your support of Senate Bill 72, and thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Senator Neal.
I don't have a question, actually, Senator Lang.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation, and I appreciate it. I guess it's a process question that I have, not having served on an education committee. Is it normal that a NRS bill is put forward directing what the education interim committee studies during the interim? I've sat on multiple interim committees, and we usually develop that policies of what we want to listen and what presentations we have during that interim. I'm just wondering if the education committee traditionally gets directed on what they're going to study during the interim. So it's a process question.
I think that might be Mr. Killian's answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. So with the passage of AB 443 last session that created the Joint Interim Standing Committee structure, previously these were the kinds of things where the legislature would prescribe a study and then either create a body to do it, or the Legislative Commission would appoint a study committee to carry out the study. Under the new Joint Interim Standing Committee structure, however, those would be assigned to one of the Joint Interim Standing Committees to conduct. So this bill, I think you're going to see more bills like this moving forward, where the studies get prescribed to one of the Joint Interim Standing Committees, rather than just put out there as a study that a committee will be created to do.
Great, and thank you for that, because I do support giving the interim committee direction. Here's what we need to know, but I worry that it narrows what you can study. If something comes up in the meantime, some crisis that we need to address during the interim, would you have the leeway to do that in addition to what being prescribed here?
Mr. Killian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. So in addition to any studies that are prescribed by the legislature, each of the Joint Interim Standing Committees is required to develop a work plan for the interim and to submit that to the Legislative Commission for approval at the beginning of the interim. So any of those other issues that come up could independently be addressed by the Joint Interim Standing Committee and that work plan approved by the Legislative Commission.
Excellent, thank you, thank you.
Senator Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think most of my question was asked right there, because I noticed, Senator, that the bill has no fiscal note at all. And typically when we put together a task force or a study, and there's usually a dollar amount, but now I understand why. It's procedurally, it's a little bit different because we have the standing committees. We're asking them to do the studying. We're basically giving that interim committee an assignment. This is what we'd like you to look at before the next legislative session. Is that fair and accurate? Is that why it's a zero?
Yes, it's a little bit like being in a government class and getting a paper to do.
Yeah, 10-page paper. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, committee, are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. And we're going to go to public comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone in the room wishing to speak in favor of Senate Bill 72?
Good afternoon again, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mary Pruszinski, representing Nevada Association of School Superintendents. And I do want to clarify that NAS represents all 17 districts and superintendents. But the topics outlined here are very important. And I think the clarification from council here on the committee was very helpful. So the NAS stands ready to assist in any way we can with the studies, and we're supportive of the bill. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Anyone else in Carson City wishing to speak in favor? Anyone in Las Vegas wishing to speak in favor? Anyone on the phones wishing to speak in support?
Thank you, Chair. To provide testimony in support of Senate Bill 72, please press star 9 on your phone to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Thank you. Is there anyone in Carson City wishing to speak against Senate Bill 72?
Hello, Madam Chairman. My name is, excuse me, my name is Janine Hansen. I'm the state president of Nevada Families for Freedom. I'm not against this bill. I just had one concern I wanted to mention. In the first study, it talks about programs to improve mental health and wellness of pupils, including without limitation, evidence-based health therapies and practices. There's been a lot of concerns with parents when they aren't informed about what kind of testing or what kind of services or therapies might be available in the schools. And I know this is just a study, but this has been an ongoing problem for many parents, advocate groups in the schools, to be sure that if there's any kind of ongoing health therapies or actual practices or reviews or tests or anything else, that the parent would be informed and involved in knowing what that is so that they can be a partner in helping their child and to succeed in the school. And we don't want the rights of parents ignored with regards to their responsibility to their own children. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else wishing to speak against Senate Bill 72? Anyone in Las Vegas wishing to speak against Senate Bill 72? Anyone on the phones?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in opposition on Senate Bill 72, please press star 9 on your phone to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone in Carson City wishing to speak in the neutral? Anyone in Las Vegas wishing to speak neutral? And anyone on the phones wishing to speak neutral?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in neutral on Senate Bill 72, please press star 9 on your phone to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you so much. And with that, we want to thank Senator Dondero Loop for leaving her committee and coming over. And we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 72. And now we'll move in the agenda to the overview of the Nevada State Public Charter School Authority and SPCSA-sponsored charter schools. And we thank you for their Executive Director, Rebecca, and General Counsel Ryan Herrick for being here today. And please proceed when you're ready.
All right, thank you for bearing with me. Good afternoon, Chair Lang and Vice Chair Flores and members of the Senate Education Committee. My name is Rebecca Fiden. I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of the State Public Charter School Authority. With me today is our General Counsel, Ryan Herrick. Today, I'll be providing an overview of the State Public Charter School Authority and our sponsored schools, as well as some information about the performance of our schools. As you may know, the State Public Charter School Authority was created in 2011 with 3 primary purposes: to authorize high-quality schools, to provide oversight of those schools, and to serve as a model of best practices in charter school authorizing. The State Public Charter School Authority's strategic plan, which was adopted in 2019, is centered on a vision of equitable access to diverse, innovative, and high-quality public schools for every Nevada student. And our mission is to sponsor, support, and oversee dynamic and responsive public charter schools that prepare all students for academic, social, and economic success. The State Public Charter School Authority has a 9-member appointed board. We currently have 27 full-time employees spread across our offices here in Carson City and Las Vegas. And in addition to the statutory purposes I outlined earlier, we serve as the local educational agency for our schools, which means we have certain responsibilities outlined in federal law, including the responsibility to administer certain federal education grants. Annually, those grants account for about $40 million that we receive from the Nevada Department of Education and pass through to our schools. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen an additional approximately $100 million in federal grants that we have passed through to our schools. For the 2022-23 school year, the State Public Charter School Authority oversees 78 charter school campuses located across 5 counties, with the majority of our schools located in Clark County. Enrollment as of October 1st of 2022 was just under 60,000 students, which represents about 12% of the state's public school enrollment. Charter schools offer a wide variety of educational models, as you can see listed on this slide. And this provides a wide range of educational options for students and their families. One of the things that we often get questions about is where the State Public Charter School Authority fits into the educational landscape. So the next few slides are aimed at providing some information about who all the entities are and explaining some common charter school terminology. As you know, the Nevada Department of Education is the state educational agency. And the State Public Charter School Authority follows Nevada Department of Education guidelines, policies, procedures. We report certain data and information to the Nevada Department of Education, just like a school district. What makes the State Public Charter School Authority unique is that we're not a school district, and so we don't operate the schools ourselves. Instead, we are a charter school sponsor. And I'll note that nationally, sometimes people use the term authorizer. And so if you hear the term authorizer or sponsor, those can be used interchangeably from time to time and hopefully don't cause too much confusion. As I mentioned, we are also a local educational agency, so we receive grants from the Nevada Department of Education that we pass through to our schools. And finally, we're also a state agency and part of the executive branch. Again, the State Public Charter School Authority doesn't operate schools. Instead, we sponsor schools. So each of our schools is subject to a charter contract. The charter contract is between the State Public Charter School Authority's board and the governing body of the charter school. So we often refer to those governing bodies that have a contract as a charter holder. The charter holder or governing body is then responsible for operating the school. A charter holder or governing body can have a single campus, or in some cases, have multiple campuses that they're responsible for overseeing. Finally, the charter holder or governing body can contract with vendors for services, which I'll get into here in just a moment. This provides a bit more detail regarding how a charter school is structured. Again, if a school has multiple campuses, each campus would have an administrator and staff, and all of those individuals are employed directly by the charter school's governing body, not the State Public Charter School Authority. Again, we have a staff of 27. Typically, when there are multiple campuses, there is an executive director or lead principal who primarily reports to the board. But I'll note the administrative structure of our schools can vary. For example, we have one school that has an executive director of operations and an executive director of academics, and they both report directly to the governing board. As I mentioned earlier, charter holders can contract with vendors, and we often get questions about this. Again, it's not uncommon for our schools to contract with vendors, and sometimes these are similar to contracts that a school district might have with a vendor, such as a contract for professional development, curriculum, legal services, etc. However, our schools are often small, and so many of them do not have the scale or size to make, for example, managing information technology in-house cost-effective. So again, you often see schools contracting out for specialty services like information technology, legal, and accounting, because they're too small to have their own staff dedicated to that specialty. In some cases, charter schools contract with organizations called educational management organizations or charter management organizations. These are both types of entities that provide centralized school services to charter schools. So they may offer a package of services rather than a school finding each vendor and taking a more a la carte approach. The difference between an educational management organization and a charter management organization is whether or not they're incorporated as a nonprofit. To be a charter management organization, the entity would need to be incorporated as a nonprofit. But again, the types of services these two entities provide can be very similar. Charter management organizations and educational management organizations provide a range of services. One compared to the next could be very different, but some of the common services that they do provide are listed here on this slide. In addition, the fees paid to a charter management organization or educational management organization by a charter holder varies based on those services that are provided through that contract. It's important to note that, again, these are vendors of the charter holder, so it is the governing bodies of the charter schools that oversee those services and ensure that those vendors are delivering on their contracts. Again, I know this is a lot of jargon, so hopefully this helps to paint a picture of all the parties and how they interact with each other. With that, I'll move on to talking a little bit about school performance. The State Public Charter School Authority has been focused on 3 strategic goals: providing families with access to high-quality schools, ensuring that all students succeed, including those from historically underserved student groups, and increasing the diversity of students served to ensure we serve a representative population of students. The first couple slides, I'll focus on the first goal and go on from there. So with regard to the first goal, high-quality schools, this slide provides data for the 21-22 school year, the most recent year's data that is available. Based on data from the Nevada School Performance Framework, which measures school performance of all public schools, including charter schools, 80% had an index score of 50 points or more. In a typical year, this would equate to a rating of 3 stars or better. As many of you know, there weren't officially star ratings this year, and so we leveraged the index score to try to do some analysis. Additionally, the State Public Charter School Authority had an 86% graduation rate as of the class of 2022, and almost every one of our high schools had a graduation rate above the statewide graduation rate. When looking at the national context, we also see that the State Public Charter School Authority has outperformed state proficiency rates in many other states that offer the Smarter Balanced Assessment to 3rd to 8th grade students. Finally, when we look at performance of our schools, we often look at our Title I schools as well as our non-Title I schools. And we see that in both cases, they tend to outperform the state when it comes to the Nevada School Performance Framework. Again, here we're looking at that 50-point cutoff because in a typical year, that would equate to a 3-star or adequate rating, given the limitations of the data that we have in the most recent year. Finally, one of the things we've been watching closely is how our schools have handled and responded to the pandemic and how schools have managed ensuring students are continuing to make progress despite some of the impacts. When we look overall at school performance, we see that we have maintained about the same percentage of schools that have a 50 index score or more. And as for our graduation rate, we've actually seen an 8 percentage point increase over the last 4 years, despite the impacts of COVID-19. Moving on to our second goal, which is focused on ensuring every student succeeds. This graph shows the difference between the State Public Charter School Authority's proficiency rate and state rates for each student group. When we look at this data, we see that across every student group, the charter school students within Charter School Authority's sponsored schools exceed the state average in both math and English language arts on the 3rd to 8th grade Smarter Balanced Assessment. With regard to the 11th grade ACT assessment, SPCSA students exceed the state average in math and English language arts in almost every student group, as you can see here as well. While we are proud of these results, we continue to work to improve outcomes for every student across every student group, and we know that there continue to be some opportunity gaps that our schools continue to work towards closing. And finally, for our third goal, to serve a representative population of students, the State Public Charter School Authority has made steady progress towards alignment with the state's demographic. This includes steady increases in the percent of students qualifying for free and reduced price lunch, as well as English language learners. In particular, we see that new schools that have opened within the State Public Charter School Authority in the last few years are more reflective of the state's demographics, and that's helped us to move the needle in terms of the overall population. So to summarize, the State Public Charter School Authority's work is centered on a vision of equitable access to diverse, innovative, and high-quality public schools for every Nevada student. And as demonstrated through our strategic goals, we aim to provide high-quality schools that serve all students effectively. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. I'll go to Senator Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I remember when I first had the pleasure to sit on this committee back in 2015, on the Assembly side, the conversation often started with me, do our schools match in terms of DNA demographics? And I think maybe at that time, there was a few questions, and I think a lot of our charter schools at the time weren't necessarily in our districts. I felt that they were in areas where they weren't necessarily attracting certain types of populations of students. The challenges I thought were different. But I start there because with time, as my conversation started there, I've seen a genuine investment and a focus on ensuring that we're in areas where the needs are at, and we're meeting students where they're at and families where they need it most. So I start there just by saying thank you for that. But I also want to give you an opportunity to kind of break down some of these slides, particularly those where you mentioned that you're performing better than students in the same age group around the state. If we think that's an apples to apples comparison now, how far are we from the DNA of what's happening in our regular, if I use Clark County School District, a student, the demographics of students and the challenges there versus what's happening in our charter schools. If you could get into some of that, and then maybe I'll have a follow-up after that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Flores, for the question. So I think we could spend all day talking about this. I'll be totally honest.
Please identify yourself.
Apologies. That's the only time I'll forget today. Rebecca Fiden for the record. So I think what I would highlight is a few things. One, I think we've made significant progress in closing some of the demographic gaps. What I will say is, we only graduate 12th graders, right? And so that change over time does take time. A lot of the schools we have opened in the last few years, about 75% of them are Title I schools. So we've had a significant number of new Title I schools that's, changed the demographics and changed the makeup of the schools within our portfolio, so to speak. And so, apples to apples is always a hard thing to say, but I think we've made a lot of progress in that area. And what I would highlight is that we have some incredible examples of success within our schools. Whether you're talking about Akipo Academy on the east side, I'm not sure if that's in your district, but I know you're familiar with it. Whether you're talking about Matter Academy of Northern Nevada up here in downtown Reno, we have some examples of schools that are, CEP schools, which means community eligible program. They're serving a very high percentage of students that qualify for free and reduced price lunch, and are significantly exceeding the results that we're seeing statewide. And so I think that we're seeing definitely places where there are bright spots, and I think are continuing to move to make progress there. I think overall, the data points around Goal 2 show us that, when you look student group to student group, by comparison, we are seeing higher rates of proficiency. Proficiency is not the only measure. We have to look at growth. We have to look at, a wide range of measures. But I think when we do an initial cross-section, I think we do see a lot of progress. And I think we have our schools to appreciate for that, the work they've done. And certainly, I think we're proud of that progress and able to, proud to be able to demonstrate that we are serving students effectively across all student groups. So hopefully that answers your question. But again, I think we could go down this rabbit hole for a long time.
Madam Chair, if I could have a quick follow-up. And I think you forgot to identify because you got so excited about the conversation, which I appreciate. Slide 16, you highlight the fact that despite the pandemic being a horrible reality for adults, much more for our kids, despite that you think when we compare students, that they performed better. I anticipate that me in 2015 would have been arguing, well, if we have two different populations where the challenges aren't the same, then it's not fair to say that. But I think this is an opportunity for you, if we could, to dive into even where we're seeing that the students had similar challenges to their counterparts. Here's why we think, despite that being the same, why we think students perform better. Maybe you can highlight specific examples and or some of your schools where you can say, because of this, and because we have XYZ, I believe that the students would have performed better under our model than that same exact student perhaps being at CCSD, for example.
Rebecca Fiden, for the record. Thank you, Vice Chair Flores, for the question. So what I will say is, before I go too far down this rabbit hole, I want to say I want all of our schools in Nevada to be excellent. So I often hesitate to compare our schools to other schools because I think that what we want is we want all schools to be excellent. What I will say is we've definitely seen some really effective work at our schools. I mentioned Akipo Academy earlier. I think that's a really great example. I had the opportunity to go to their annual award ceremony a couple weeks ago and was floored by the celebration of the alumni who are, and the work that their alumni are doing in their own community and the progress that their alumni are making, graduating from college and moving on to contribute to their community and the larger, our larger community. I think a lot of that goes back to, in terms of strategies and what our schools are doing, again, they're different, but small size, their ability to focus on instructional strategies that they've found effective. They've invested heavily in their communities. We see strong parent and family engagement. And then I think the other piece, when we think about the COVID-19 pandemic, I think our schools, again, because they are small, because you have one governing body, maybe over 3 schools or maybe over a single school site, they were really responsive to what was happening in their immediate community in a way that I think only charter schools, only small schools were really set up to do. I think that's a part of the nature of a charter school, being small and being able to be really responsive because they could kind of turn on a dime in a way that's harder to do for a larger district. And so I think that's part of the reason we see some of the results we see is that they've really been able to pinpoint like what's happening in our 3rd grade classrooms and how do we turn that quickly. And so I think that's where we're seeing some of those results. Again, I think we could go on for a while and talk about this, but hopefully that gets at some of the details that you were hoping to hear.
Thank you for that.
If I could just follow up on what Senator Flores is asking, what are the average class sizes, for instance, in K-3, 4, 6, and high school in the charter schools?
Rebecca Fiden, for the record, I will admit that I don't know them off the top of my head, but I recently pulled them because there's a bill related to class size, and I can certainly provide that data. We have many of our schools will have 2 individuals in our early childhood classrooms, so maybe K-2. Sometimes that is a teacher and an aide, so maybe it's a licensed teacher as well as a paraprofessional. I think we see smaller class sizes in general, but I won't say that we don't have some classrooms that are 30 students, and we certainly see some places where those classes are larger. All of our schools have within their contract kind of a maximum limit on how many students they can enroll. And so because of that, there are some constraints in terms of their size. And I think, again, they work within that. And, when we go out to do site evaluations, we do focus groups with parents. It's part of a standard site evaluation protocol. By far the most common thing we hear from parents is, we like our school because everybody knows my kid. I feel like people listen to me. If I have a problem, I can go right to the person who's going to help. And I think some of that's just, again, the smaller size of our schools. We have a high school here in Sparks. It's 150 kids. You're not going to find a high school like that in a traditional school district. And it's a different environment. It's a different learning environment. And so again, is it the best school for every child? Maybe not, but that's part of the idea, is that we're providing options. And so class size is one of those things.
Great, thank you. Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I have a more of a general question. So on several slides, you have the free and reduced lunch, and I'll just go to page 10 and the top chart where it starts at 2020, 2021, 21 to 22, and then up to 23. So what does this data actually capture? Because the free and reduced lunch, as you know, the definition was expanded during COVID. So who is captured in free and reduced lunch actually is not necessarily a struggling Title I kid. It is wider than that. So can you disaggregate this data so I can see who truly might have been not the COVID at risk, right? Because that matters in numbers. And I wonder how much it plays into the data where you mentioned free and reduced lunch on your slide goal 2, page 9.
Thank you, Senator Neal. Rebecca Fiden, for the record, can you confirm I'm looking at the right slide here? Your numbers aren't lining up with mine. It's probably my fault, but is this?
So well, yeah, that's the right slide.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
So, yeah, because I'm going by the page number, not your slide number.
I apologize. Thank you. So with regard to free and reduced price lunch, this is a conversation we've actually had a couple times. So what this data point captures is the number of students who are either directly certified, meaning that through some sort of federal assistance program, they would be an automatic receiver of free and reduced price lunch under the federal guidelines, or that they have filled out income eligibility paperwork, or that they are attending a community eligible program school, which is a school that's a designated high poverty school. It is a little bit of a challenge to get under these numbers, and what I will say is that it is an apples to apples comparison in that it's the same, we're providing the same data that the state's data is, and so while it's a little bit complicated, the statewide number versus our number is the same. The fact that all students received free lunch last year did not mean all students qualified as free and reduced price lunch. There are still paperwork to be filled out, qualifiers to be designated as free and reduced price lunch, and the state did collect all of that data each year throughout the pandemic, even in the years where all students received free lunch. So there is still a designation of free and reduced price lunch eligible, despite how the meals were actually served. And with regard to these numbers, I think we are a little concerned that we think that it is a information point that tells us about our comparison to the state to some extent, but we also realize that there are some ways where it may not be a clear picture. And so hopefully that helps, but again, we're using the state's database. This is the numbers released by the Department of Education in terms of free and reduced price lunch eligible.
Madam Chair, follow-up? Sure. No, it actually didn't help, but I will have to look at the state data because we included almost all children in free and reduced lunch during COVID. Like, I distinctly remember sitting on IFC. So a disaggregation of this data would be very, very important to break out so that the true measurement of when you're comparing, saying, well, we've outperformed in free and reduced lunch category when the type of child that may have been included in your 2020, 2021 data may not have been a traditional struggling student. The second question that I had is on your data for academic gains, which is your slide, it's my page 8, but your slide 16. Do you have any data that breaks out the academic gaps that a student might have came in with that helped you to create the gain? Not all students walk in equal, right? And not all students walk in equal when we compare a charter school to a public school where the gap that you may have received may have been a different gap that you needed to close. And I'll give you this example because this is happening literally at West. And West has a choice high school and a choice elementary, but not a choice middle. The choice high school, I think, has 125 kids. The middle school, middle school has the bulk of the neighborhood children, who are the traditional children who we would have to serve and take care of and educate. They are not performing at the same level. Neither is the choice elementary, where they get to choose and select and modify their numbers, and the type of child that is being educated has very different risks and challenges and academic gaps than the middle school. And so for me, I need a disaggregation of data, and I don't know if you're under ESSA where you have to disaggregate data in order to help us understand performance. Gap matters to me, right? Because this story is being told in North Las Vegas, and what I see are black and browns in the public schools and everybody else at the charter in my district. And that worries me because that means that those children are the ones that we're really, really taking care of and trying to educate, who have that 6th grade level reading level and they're in 10th grade.
Rebecca Fiden for the record. So just like all of our district schools, our schools are measured on the Nevada School Performance Framework with growth data and opportunity gaps. So that data is available online for each one of our schools. And we can certainly provide you with that information. All of our schools have the same measurements under the Nevada School Performance Framework. That we could provide by school if you'd like, or we could provide that at a more aggregated level if it would be helpful. What I will say is we've worked hard to move towards serving a representative population of students, and I think have the same, hopefully, goal that we all would, which is we're serving a snapshot of the state's population, and we're serving those students really effectively, and that when those students show up at our doorstep, that we're helping to grow every single student, regardless of what challenges they walk in with, and hopefully they're equal to the challenges that are walking into our school district schools.
Madam Chair? Yes. Just really quick, and then I'm going to let it go. Thank you for that response, but I feel strongly about this point. It's not an apples to apple when you can't break down the academic gap that you served. And it matters because the story that is told has to be understood by, if you can tell me when you get this data by school that we had a 5th grader reading at a 3rd grade level and we made gains, and now they're reading at a 5th grade level or 6th grade level, where then you can show me apple to apple, a Matt Kelly 2 charter in the same neighborhood, meaning take Dreams, Agassiz, former Agassiz, and then tell me about Matt Kelly, and then tell me about Carson, and then show me how you change the academic gap for those children within that framework. Because that's important, because that's an apple to apple to me. That's a bridge that needs to be crossed. And if you're doing that work, then, hallelujah and praise God, because we need to find out what that strategy is, because it's not just reduction of class size. It is the child in which you are serving and the barrier that you are having to overcome, which may not be equal to. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Rebecca Fiden for the record. Again, Senator Neal, I'm happy to pull some school-specific data. If you want us to go down to the student level and do some anonymous, we're happy to do some of that. But I think we'll grab the opportunity gap data and share some of the progress we've seen in terms of the growth data. And we could certainly pull schools in the same district. We actually do some of that neighborhood school comparison internally to understand how our schools are doing. Again, what's going on with the school down the street compared to the school that we have and how are our schools performing. Because opening a school that isn't offering a good option or a better option to our community, that doesn't serve the community well, right? And so happy to pull that data and make sure to share that with you as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Senator Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was a very good discussion, actually, on the gaps and how we're servicing those gaps. And I'd like to see that data as well, and like to see how that percentage. Every time you kept saying gap, though, I kept thinking I had a T-shirt back in the day. It said, the gap, the gap band. It was really good. I can't help but thinking about it now. The question I have is about I looked at your numbers that are coming out and how well we're doing, right? And it seems like that, especially during the time when COVID really was a challenge to public schools and how large they were, especially down in Clark County. A lot of the charter schools being small and nimble were able to, to pivot and figure out ways to, deliver that education. And so I think the numbers look really good. The question I have for you is because of those numbers, and I know that there are a lot of schools that have very deep waiting lists. Can you let me know a little bit more about the number of applicants we've had for charter schools, number of charter applicants we've had, and the number of, for example, in 2020, the beginning of this year, I guess would be 2022, 23, how many applicants we had right previous to the beginning of the school year, and how many were granted, and then you can break it down in the percentage, I guess, because I'd like to kind of get an idea of the number of applicants, the percentages of those applicants that we grant compared to other states like Arizona.
Rebecca Fiden for the record. Senator Hammond, I have to tell you, you're stretching my memory a little bit, but I will definitely get you some historical data and provide that to you. I believe this past application cycle, we had 5 applicants submit, and I believe 2 of them were approved, which is 40%. The national average is about 33%. But again, I'm happy to bring you the kind of 3-year data on that. That's the question you're asking?
Yes, I'm trying to figure out how many we're bringing online, and given the success that I'm seeing, how many are we coming online compared to other states that also have charter and then charter availability. I'm trying to figure out how many schools we have coming online compared to Arizona, Tennessee, and some of the other ones.
Rebecca Fiden for the record. We do have. So we opened a number of schools this year. We had 5 new charter holders that came online in the 22-23 school year. And then we had a couple of expansions of additional campuses of existing charters where they were already a charter holder and they just added another site. So I think we had a total of 8 new campuses this year. And then going into next year, we're slated to have 4 new campuses.
Okay. And if you can, later on, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of get an idea of where we are compared to other states, mainly in the West, but also some of the other ones that are in charter, how many they are bringing online every year, and we can talk offline on that.
Thank you. Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Lang. Thank you so much for the presentation today. I was just wondering, just to kind of clarify, so for free reduced lunch, is that what you're reporting here is not all kids, which a lot of the schools were made free reduced lunch to give food at the school level. But for free reduced lunch for testing purposes and reporting on testing purposes, is that something that parents have to fill out and then they qualify and then that's reported? Or are we reporting free reduced lunch for the masses? Because
Rebecca Fiden for the record. Thank you, Senator Buck. So again, the last couple of years have been unique because initially the feds agreed to cover all schools to feed every child. And recently the state has come in and filled the gap in funding so that all students receive meals that want them. That said, free and reduced price lunch eligible is a designation by the feds. So each individual student would have to meet certain income or qualification thresholds to be considered free or reduced price lunch eligible, even though they might they might get a free lunch, but not be considered free and reduced price lunch eligible just because of the dynamics of right now. The official free and reduced price lunch eligible definition comes from the federal government, and it either is because you are part of some sort of assistance program like SNAP, or because you meet the federal income threshold. Those are primarily the two ways that you end up in a free and reduced price lunch category. So hopefully, give me a second bite at trying to clarify that. I know this is complicated because of the terminology, but.
Thank you so much. And one more, if I may, Chair. What percentage increase in actual then legitimate free reduced lunch and also each diverse subgroup have we grown, or has charter schools grown and increased their enrollment?
Rebecca Fiden, for the record, thank you, Senator Buck. So over the last 4 years, we've gone up about 10 percentage points in the free and reduced price lunch designation, which is, again, we're about 46% now. We were about 36% in 2019. We've also seen a significant increase in our Title I schools. Title I schools typically have a higher percentage of free and reduced price lunch students. So we had 16 back in 2019. We currently have, we are up to 36. We were previously at 20, so we've gone up by 16 Title I schools. So that's another way that we have seen a shift in the student population, as well as the kind of portfolio and the makeup of our portfolio.
And really quick, or I'll come back if possible.
Thank you, Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. Of your 78 charter schools, are they all brick and mortar schools?
Rebecca Fiden, for the record. Thank you, Senator Titus. The majority are brick and mortar schools. We do have a handful of full-time virtual schools. We have, I believe, 4 full-time virtual schools plus one, what we would call a hybrid school. So that is Beacon Academy. Beacon Academy actually has 2 campuses. They're actually an alternative school that's primarily serve credit deficient students that are severely credit deficient. It's a state designation, so it's not kind of a term we made up. They have state board approval to function as alternative school, and they have kids come to campus 2 days a week and then learn remotely 2 days a week. Most of them are over age and undercredited, so it's a little bit of a different instructional model. So again, 73 of our schools, I think off the top of my head, 72, are brick and mortar schools compared to a handful of non-brick and mortar.
Great. Another question, Madam Chair? So how do you have to follow the same licensure requirement for your teachers as our public schools do?
Rebecca Fiden, for the record, the licensure requirements are slightly different. All of our teachers who are in core content areas, so your math, reading, science, social studies, as well as your EL teachers, English language learner teachers, and your special education teachers must be licensed. In addition, you can have no less than 80% of your teachers licensed. Very few schools are anywhere near the 80%. They're mostly way above the 80% because the majority of your teachers are in those core areas. But there are a handful of teachers in our schools that are usually kind of specialty subjects. Maybe an art or music teacher or some sort of other type of elective that are allowed to be unlicensed but are required to go through the same background check process.
Thank you for that. And then the ones, if I might continue, Madam Chair, the ones that are, you go through high school or to the 12th grade, do all of those offer like a dual accreditation? And do you have any partnerships with the community colleges? And what % of those schools have that option for dual accreditation?
Rebecca Fiden, for the record, all of our high schools do offer a dual credit option. Some of them do it extensively, some of them do it on a smaller basis, and the schools have those relationships directly with the community college or university.
And just a final comment, if I might, Madam Chair, my daughter taught at a charter school for a period of time. And when I asked her the difference between teaching in a charter school and a public school, she said, Mom, that the parents are accountable at the charter school. If there's an issue with the kids, you call the parents. And that's unfortunate that parental involvement is just limited, it seems like, to our charter school, or we can hold the parents accountable. So that was just an observation for somebody who taught at a charter school. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Buck.
All right, one more. Thank you, Chair Lang. I know that Democracy Prep is on the historic West Side, and it's in your portfolio. Is West Elementary, Middle, or High School in your portfolios?
Rebecca Fiden, for the record. Democracy Prep is one of the SPCSA-sponsored schools. I believe West is a CCSD-sponsored school.
Okay, and
I'm sorry, a CCSD-operated school. They're a district school, is my understanding.
so really quick, what would be some suggestions on ways to get more schools in areas, in disadvantaged areas, areas that need choice?
Rebecca Fiden, for the record, I believe you're asking how do we make sure we expand options in high-need communities through charter schools? Is that? So I think, honestly, we've really done that over the last couple of years, in part through our strategic plan, in part through, we do a lot of outreach with folks who say to us, we're interested in opening a charter school. They have to submit a letter of intent, so we kind of know the application's coming. And have really worked to encourage them to consider, where is the greatest need in our community and think about that. And I think folks have responded to that. Again, the majority of schools we've opened in the last couple of years are in areas where we historically didn't have charter schools. And so I think we've really worked to try to expand access. When we talk about equitable access, it's not equitable if you have to drive across town because there's not a charter school in your community. And so we've really worked to make sure that when we're opening new schools, that they're not concentrated strictly in certain communities that historically have had charter schools. It's something that our board has talked a lot about. And what I'll also note is that, we've talked about the transportation recommendation from the Funding Commission as an opportunity that may help to increase access to charter schools. Currently, charter schools don't receive transportation funding. And so without that, it is very hard for our schools to find the money in their general operating budget to transport students. And inevitably, there are some kids for whom, if there's not a transportation, if there's not a school bus, that is a hurdle for them. And so, I think if the Funding Commission's recommendation were adopted, that would be a tool to help increase access potentially.
Any further questions from the committee? Senator Donate.
Thank you so much, Chair Lang. I just have a quick clarification question in regards to it. So, I have been focusing on the special ed breakdown. I think that's something that it's important. And if you can break it down further than what you have on this slide, I would love to see that in future correspondence. I think, from my understanding, it was the math portion was not captured. So that's part of my interest area. I know we mentioned earlier about tracking the enrollments of folks that are applying to these schools. Do you also track students that have to be rerouted back to public schools, or in essence, the transition between charter to public school?
Rebecca Fiden, for the record, in terms of transitions back and forth between schools, I don't think we have ever kind of pulled that data set and said, how many are moving between, but I think that the large majority of our students come from a district school or go back to a district school when they come or go. And so it's certainly something we could look at. What I will say is, some of our schools see more turnover from students than others, and sometimes that's a product of where the school is located and families moving and that school becoming kind of out of range. But is there a specific enrollment issue that you're looking for us to dig into, or happy to pull some additional data if it would be helpful?
No, I mean, for me, I would like to see first of all, if you are tracking that information and which schools are the ones that are receiving the most turnover, I think that's probably the most impactful for me because if it is in my district, right, I think that's something that I would like to know. So I think that pretty much it just answers my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question on, for special education. Historically, there have been barriers for special education having licensed teachers following the law within the charter model. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Rebecca Fiden for the record. So charter schools are required to have licensed educators for special education. As we know, there are challenges recruiting, and special education, just like math education, is a place where we see nationally some of the biggest gaps in terms of numbers of educators and vacancy rates. With regard to our schools, again, sometimes they have to use a substitute. That is, again, what a district has to do in the event that there's a special education teacher that's out or may need to fill a long-term gap. And so that does have to be done sometimes, but it does have to be done within the requirements of the licensure and serving special education students. With regard to generally serving special education students, what I will say is historically there's been some criticism that our schools don't serve special education students or don't serve certain types of needs. And I think that, one, that's not legal. Our schools are required to serve all kids. There have been a few instances where that type of thing has been brought to our attention, and we have worked very quickly to rectify that and make sure that that student is being served in our school. In addition, over the last 3 years, we implemented a program. We felt like our response was reactive and not proactive. So we implemented a program that we refer to as Mystery Parent Program. It's kind of like a mystery shopper. We pretend to be the parents of special education students interested in enrolling students in charter schools, and we call our schools and see what response we get to make sure that we don't hear any barriers for entry. We shouldn't hear anything that sounds like more work for a parent who has a special education child to enroll their kid than a regular student. And so we are working proactively to make sure that our schools, understand that responsibility and that we're monitoring that, not just on the back end if we hear about an issue, but also on the front end to ensure that all students get served by our schools and that there are no barriers for enrollment.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Really appreciate the conversation back and forth today. I think it was very informative, not only for the committee members, but also for you. And I would ask that, it seems like you're going back to get quite a bit of information. If you could get that to our committee secretary to save you time, she would be happy to send it out to every member on the committee. Thank you, and thank you for being here today. And with that, we'll move to public comment. Anyone wishing to make public comment, please approach the dais in Carson City. I'm sorry, please go
All good.
ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. And I say the voice of educators, I'm talking about educators in our neighborhood or traditional public schools who are charged with educating every Nevada student. We too appreciate the conversation this committee has had about charter schools. Just want to make a couple of brief points. In the Charter Authority's own presentation, charters still have significant demographic differences in student populations than our neighborhood public schools, including charters with 3% fewer students with disabilities, 4% fewer English learners, and up to 34% fewer low-income students, although we agree these numbers may be skewed a little bit due to the COVID definitions. But those differences don't even include differences in student populations that go beyond the demographics. Things like Senator Titus's point about parental involvement and family engagement. The fact that some charters actively push out students that have some disciplinary issues, those kids end up in our neighborhood public schools who are responsible for the education of every student. The Charter Authority, I think, they have made some progress on the demographic issues, but if you look at their 5-year plan, I believe they're in year 4 of their 5-year plan, they still aren't meeting their own goals on this issue of demographics. Their goals were to meet or exceed state percentages. As you can tell from their own percentages, even in their new schools, they are not meeting the statewide percentages in any of these demographics. Meanwhile, we see charters continuing to expand at very, very quick rates, and we think that the issue of charter accountability is a live one in this legislative session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to give public comment in Carson City? Anyone wishing to give public comment in Las Vegas? Anyone wishing to give public comment on the phones?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you so much. And with that, we'll close the Education Committee meeting for today, and we will meet again on Wednesday at 1 o'clock.